Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Leveraging the MultiCurrency GP module. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us today. There are a couple of housekeeping items we'd like to mention before we begin the presentation. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please either raise your hand so that we can unmute you, or you can submit them through the GoToWebinar question box. We'll be answering questions throughout the presentation, and we'll also be following up after the presentation to answer any additional questions. I'd like to introduce today's speaker. We have Amy Walsh, who is a Principal GP Consultant here at Socius. So at this point, Amy, I believe we're ready to transition the presentation over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Leslie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Walsh, and I'm a Principal Consultant with Socius. And like she said earlier, we're going to go through or walk through some items within Dynamics GP regarding multi-currency. So first thing I want to talk about is where you can get information regarding multi-currency. You can use a search engine and you can look at the ASC 830, which is the AKA FAD 52. And this will also give you more information on translation of foreign financial statements into US dollars. And the companies that consolidate as a result of any foreign operations dominated in local currencies must translate the foreign financial statements into the US dollars. And what we're talking about with ASC 830, which is requirements or accounting and reporting requirements for foreign currency translations. And it'll also cover the translation of financial statements from a foreign currency to the reporting currency. The ASC 830 also applies to the translation of financial statements for purposes of consolidation or combination or the equity method of accounting. Companies also reporting under International Financial Reporting Standards, the IFRS, are also subject to International Accounting Standards number 21, and the effects of changes in foreign rates as issued by IAS 21. Now, the IAS 21 is very similar to the ASC 830, so you will see that in the methods and rules. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the actual GL account. Now, when we set up multi-currency, what you're going to notice or what you're going to see is that the balance sheet accounts we're going to set up as the current rate or spot rate. Any profit and loss accounts we're going to actually set up as an average rate, and equity accounts we are going to set up as a historical rate. Now, with each of these methods, but each of these types of accounts, notice I have on the equity account historical rate option. It's actually optional to use a historical rate. And when I start talking about a historical rate, what I'm talking about is one static rate we use for the whole year on the equity account, or that's retained earnings. It is optional. I've had some clients use the static rate for the whole year, and this is for financial presentation purposes. And then in other times, they may use what the current rate is, which is the spot rate, the same thing they're using for all the other balance sheet accounts. So that is something you may have to research or talk to your financial accountants about, which would be the best way or what would work most appropriately for your company. Now, a few items of setup that we have to cover or need to cover in GP are, let's go over here, how the multi-currency company multi-currency setup is done. Now, first of all, multi-currency does have to be registered within your Dynamics GP company. And how you do that is you can actually go over to the Microsoft Dynamics GP and Tools and Setup, System and Registration. Now, you'll notice at the bottom, if you scroll down, there's actually a multi-currency a multi-currency management checkbox, and you will want to have this particular checkbox marked. Now, if you have been using GP for a while and you are new to multi-currency, you may want to check that multi-currency one is registered into the boxes checked, because typically in some implementations where people are not using multi-currency, the implementer will unmark the box so that you do not have to deal with the ramifications of multi-currency and having to set it up. So just check that is marked. Now, the second part of the multi-currency setup is you'll actually want to create your currency ID. Now, the currency ID window, if you go to Microsoft Dynamics GP, Tools, Setup, Tool Setup System and Currency, you will notice here on the currency ID, and I'm going to click on the lookup button because I want to explain something. Any of the currencies that you have, or if you see any currencies in this lookup and they begin with Z, like ZAUD or ZC $, these currencies are actually default or installed with your Microsoft Dynamics GP instance if the installer allows them to be used from the demo company. You do not have to use these currencies if you do not want to. For example, we see USD-US dollar. Most people do not want to see a currency in this particular, I wouldn't say format, but the currency ID, they do not want it as the US dollar sign. They'd rather see it as US. So in order to set up a currency, for example, if we were going to set up Euro, EUR. Now, I would say a common mistake, but sometimes when you set up your currency ID, you can use anything you want to. You can call it EURO. But if you are using an ISO code, which is International Standards Organization, you would probably want to keep it the same as your ISO code. So if I set up a Euro dollar amount, I would actually put in my ISO code EUR. Then I would set up, the currency symbol, and there are actually 4 predefined here. The other display symbols, I usually will use it as, or leave it as the before amount. A display sign would be a before amount. Currency symbol, you have before or after. And then you would want to put in your separators, such as a decimal. You can have a space, a period, comma, dollar sign. You can choose decimal places if you want. And the spacing between each one of the thousands of your number. And you're given an example. And then for this, whoops, hold on. Okay. There is the accounts. We'll go back to the accounts, but we first also have to give access to this currency. So the currency setup is pretty cut and dried, very simple. So we'll click Save. And then next what we'll do is go to Microsoft Dynamics GP. We'll go to Tools, Setup. And then we'll go over to System. And then you want to go down to MultiCurrency Access. So for our new currency, that's EUR, we want to actually give our Fabricam company access to that particular currency. Now, one thing to note about giving access or accessing this particular window, if you go to this window and you cannot get to it, it may give you a message saying that there are other people in the system. Well, with multi-currency, you want to log in as a system administrator, and you want to be the only one logged in to into GP, because otherwise it will not allow you access to this window. Now, if you are the only person in GP and you're giving access to other companies for this currency, if another user tries to log into GP, they will actually get a message that they cannot log into GP because the MultiCurrency Access Setup window is open. So just keep that in mind as well. But just note that when you go to give access to companies for multi-currency, that only one person, and usually that's going to be the SA, the system administrator, can be logged into the company at a time. So I'm going to click OK here. Okay, so also within setting up the currency itself, I'll also want to go back and go to Microsoft Dynamics GP. We'll go to Tools, go back to System, and then we want to establish an exchange table. Now, all an exchange table is, and we're going to look up some examples here, an exchange table is where you set up your conversion. Now, I may have a euro type currency in the system, but that is just for me to allow transactions in euro. My functional currency for this particular company is US dollar. So in essence, I am going to take in a transaction in euro, and then I'm going to translate it to a US dollar. So I want to keep that in mind whenever I am setting up a rate table. Meaning, my exchange table is probably going to look a little bit like this. Maybe euro to USD. A description. And then in the currency ID field, I want to pick basically the landing currency. So at the end of the day, I want this to be a US dollar currency. And I can put an exchange rate source. This particular field is optional, but if you want to have that detail on here, you can. You will select a rate frequency. So something like daily or weekly or biweekly, semi-monthly, or monthly. Here I'm actually going to just choose monthly. The rate calculation method, either you're going to multiply or divide it. I'm going to choose divide. The transaction rate default, you can either do an exact date, a previous date, or next date. Now these three options correlate with your rate table that we're about to see and set up. An exact date would mean that when I receive in a transaction, I need to use the exact date of the exchange rate. A previous date would mean whatever my transaction date is, look for the exchange rate of the prior date. The next date would be if I receive in a transaction, and let's just say is dated April the 11th, it's going to look to the next date available for an exchange rate, so maybe April the 12th or 13th or so on. So I'm actually going to choose just previous date. Search for unexpired rates. I usually recommend just leaving it as unlimited because you do have three options here. Okay, so I clicked on rates and it's going to give me a little message. You must save the exchange table before entering rates. Do you wish to save the exchange table? Yes, save it. All right. So once the table is saved, then we can go in here and start adding in our exchange rates. Now, remember we're going to euro to US dollar. So we want to put in a specific date, and it's giving us a date here at 4/12, and it says an expiration date of 5/12. Well, I kind of want to add it. I want to make this a monthly date. So I'm going to say April 1st to April 30th. Okay, and then I would add in the exchange rate. And you also have a time here where the exchange rate expires. And you can change this. Usually if I would just put 000, it's going to change it to expire on 12 a.m. on the last date, on the expiration date. So we'll go ahead and click the insert button. You'll notice it lands first one in the line, and then we will save it. Okay. Now I have an exchange rate created, and I have an exchange table. Now the next thing I need to do is actually give access to that exchange table. So I'm going to go back over to Microsoft Dynamics GP, Tools Setup, System, and MultiCurrency Access. Now once I click on the euro, and oh, I didn't bring in my exchange table ID. Oh, it's going to be under US dollar. Yeah, there you go. All right. So because the currency ID that I set up on my exchange rate table is going to fall underneath US dollar, but I still need to give this particular company access to that exchange table ID. So we'll just go over here, click the access button, and then click OK. Okay, so now that I have a currency set up and I also have an exchange rate table, I want to kind of go back a little bit and talk about the company multi-currency setup. Now, this is something that happens during your initial implementation, where when GP is installed, and whether you're using multi-currency or you are not using multi-currency, if you are using multi-currency, this was already set up for you. But over in Microsoft Dynamics GP, and we'll go to Tools, we'll go to Setup, we'll go to Company, and then within the company, you'll also see in here, should be multi-currency. Well, no, I'm sorry. We'll go to Tools, Setup, Financial, and Multi-currency. Okay. So during your initial implementation, and if multi-currency was registered in the multi-currency management box was checked, then someone would have gone into this window and established the functional currency and the reporting currency. Now, the functional currency, once it's set on a GP company, it is always set. It cannot be changed. And so the difference between the two is basically in each foreign entity, well, first of all, the functional currency cannot be changed. And the functional currency actually refers to the main currency used by a business or a business unit. It's actually the monetary unit of an account of a principal economic environment in which an economic entity operates. Now, the reporting currency down below is a currency that's used for the entity's financial statements. Basically, it's the reporting currency in financial statements and other financial reports. And these are the easiest to understand when they're being compiled using only one currency. Now, as you see in my instance, US dollar is used for the functional and the reporting currency. That does not always have to be the case. Sometimes you can have a functional currency that may be, British pound or something like that, but your reporting currency can be US dollar. So these two don't necessarily have to be the same. Now, a couple of other items within this window that we're going to address is actually the currency translation over here where it says the default exchange rate table IDs. We need to go through and explain that. There is actually an average calculation method here, and you'll notice there's a little drop down. And within this drop down, there are three options. There's an exchange table, and the exchange table is the average exchange table ID. The average exchange table ID is used to determine the exchange rate for the currency during the last date of the fiscal period requested. Then there is a rate average. Now, a rate average, when used, uses only the exchange rates with an exchange rate date within the requested periods are used. The system will calculate an average rate by using the sum of the rates divided by the number of the rates per period. So basically that's a monthly average. Now the rate days average uses a little bit different calculation because the system uses the sum of the number of days, the exchange rate was valid within the period specified, and divides that by the number of days in the month. Basically, this one is the sum of the rate times the number of days divided by the number of days in the month. So now out of those three, you can choose either one. People who want to do like the monthly average, like I said, they choose the rate average. Or if you want a specific rate from a specific day, then you can use the exchange table. Now below the average calculation method, you'll see your currency IDs. Now any currency that you're going to allow transactions for in your company, you'll want to have these marked. So if I want to be able to transact in euros and obviously convert them to US dollar, I need to add in each one of these fields for current, historical, average, and budget. I need to pick an exchange rate table. So I go over here. Oh. And something I kind of did a little wrong, and that's okay, is that because I added this currency as a US dollar currency, then it's not going to allow me to put it on the euro itself, which is okay because you know what? We can go back and see again how to set the rate table. So I'm going to go to Tools and Setup, and then we'll go over to System and go down to our exchange table, and then okay. And then now we will go back and we will add System Security MultiCurrency Access to our Euro. Okay, there we go. Okay. All right. So now go back to our GP, Tool, Setup, Financial, and MultiCurrency window. All right. Okay, so now all we're doing is we're selecting, we're going to be able to use the euro, and we are actually putting in the rate table for our translations from euro to US dollar. Now, these, whatever you put in these particular columns, these also correlate with your GL accounts themselves. And how that works, and I'm going to leave this window open and show you on the account itself. So let's go over to Cards and Financial and Account. Let's bring back up our multi-currency setup. Okay. So I'm just going to grab a GL account over here. Now, once I pick a certain GL account, I'm going to go down to the currency button, which is in the bottom and to the right. Let's click it, because there are a couple of options in here. The GL account currency translation type field also has a drop down, and it's average, current, or historical, right? These three options correlate with what you put on the multi-currency setup window. So in essence, and remember we were talking about before with the GL account, so the balance sheet accounts you want to have a spot rate, so that would be a current. The P&L accounts you want to have at an average rate. And then retained earnings accounts or equity accounts you can have at a historical rate, but like I said, it's optional. However, since this particular account is accounts receivable with balance sheet, so I'm going to leave that as the current spot rate. So whatever I put on the rate table for current is what it's going to use for reporting purposes for this particular account. Now, maybe, like I was explaining before, maybe I want to use a historical rate for my retained earnings. If that's the case, then a historical rate would be a rate that either I type in manually, but what we'll do is, so I'm just going to pick one that's different. Let's take a look on that. Okay. I'm actually going to have to go back to my euro US dollar, so I'll have to create another rate table in order for it to work. That's okay. All right. All right. And then the average, if I use something for the average, whatever the rate table is, then I'll need to change the currency translation type to average, such as so you see the P&L accounts are actually in its average. The other thing you will need to do on your GL account is you want to select the currencies that you're going to allow into the account. For example, this particular account has Australian dollars, Canadian dollars, New Zealand dollars, South African rand, Singapore dollars, so on and so forth. Now, at this point, you might think, oh my gosh, if I set this up, I have to go through every account manually. No, you do not. There is a mass update. I will show you that here in just a second. But I also want to go through and talk about really quick the revaluation. Now, accounts that need to be revalued, you can do that within the GP module. Revaluing an account. Okay, so for revaluing accounts, all it is you would check the box here, and then you would determine if you want to revalue by net change or by period balances. And what that means is if you mark the net change to revalue, it is a selected count based on the net change or the difference in the account's beginning and ending balances for the revaluation period. Now, if you were to mark the period balance, this would actually revalue the account based on the period balance or the current balance of the account on the last day of the revaluation period. Typically, revaluation periods are end of month. Now, and because when I say end of month, that most companies are on a calendar year, I would believe, which the last day of the month is their month end. However, there are other companies that are maybe on like a 445 or a 454 type accounting period. So that's where we're within at the end of the month. There is also this post results too, and there's two options here. One is account and one is financial offset. The difference between the two is account means when you revalue, if it's an unrealized or if it's a realized gain, then do you want this realized gain to be posted to this particular GL account? That's all that means. Financial offset means post it to either an unrealized or realized GL account, a different account other than this particular account. That's all that means. And typically people will have the financial offset there because they do want the difference to be posted in either a realized or unrealized GL account. Okay, so the other part of the multi-currency setup here, and you'll also, if you are importing in your budget or using Dynamics GP for your budget model, you can also establish or set in an exchange rate or a different exchange rate table for that if you want to. The options down below are in the Allow section in exchange rate options. You can allow to use exchange rates without adding to the table, which means that exchange rate I set up, if I have a transaction and I have an exchange rate that is different from what I have coming in from the rate table, if I have this allow box checked, that means that I can actually key in that particular exchange rate and it not be listed or added to the rate table. The next option is remove modify rates. If the box is selected, then you are allowing rates to be modified or removed from the rate ID table. Override rates. Override rates is when I'm entering in a transaction and the rate is defaulted based on my parameters that I'm set. It's defaulting in on my transactions. Do you want to allow someone to be able to override a particular rate that is coming in as from a default in GP? Override rate variance and override reporting rates. If I set a rate variance on my rate ID table, this particular option will allow me to override that maximum that I've set. It's all the same. An override reporting rate. The reporting rate is up here, so and usually we just leave that, it's 1-to-1. We don't usually change this, but if we wanted to be able to override whatever rate necessary that we put in this field, we have to have this box checked. These particular options are also can be password specific. Now, if I have something like override rate, and maybe I do not want someone to override rates that does not have a password to override the rate, I could actually create a password and then they would be prompted to enter in a password whenever they come across a scenario where they are put in the position of having or wanting to override a rate. Average exchange rate display, the calculation method, either multiply or divide. And typically I usually set it to divide. Maintain history, you definitely always, for sure, want to have general ledger account checked. Default transaction rate types. Now, you'll see in financial, sales, and purchasing, there are 3 different rate types you can have. And when you go to set up multi-currency, normally these 3 fields are blank. So you do want to choose one of the options, average, buy, or sell. And typically what I do is I usually have average for all of them and don't have a different one. So, like I said, I usually just have them this way. Now, and then after you have, your multi-currency setup window populated, you'll just go up here to the top and then click OK. Now, a couple of things I do want to talk about as far as the mass update to the general ledger. Oh. My notes real quick. Okay. So remember earlier I said there is a mass update. So if you go to cards and financial, and there is a currency account update window down here. This will allow you to choose a range of accounts to update. So all you have to do is go over to the lookup glass and pick which segment you want. And in my case, it should be segment number 2, the natural account for Fabricam. My from and to, I'm going to say all my balance sheet accounts, which I know they start in the 1000s and they go to the 3000s to 3030. Okay. And then what you want to do next is click the insert button to add it to the restrictions box. And then notice all the options that are below the restrictions box. Well, you have an update currencies, you have an update revalue option, you have an update currency translation. By checking any of these boxes, you will be given different options, such as display. Do I want to display selected currencies or all currencies? If I want to select, I really want to select currencies. And currencies marked or unmarked. Now, what I'm telling the system is for this particular range of accounts, maybe I need to add a particular currency to it. So I just created, the euro currency, and I want to add them to all of my balance sheet accounts. So I'm going to add it in the currency ID in the box below it, display. There is an update revaluation option. If I want to revalue mark or unmarked, by net change or period balance. And then the post results to, do I want to post results to an account, or do I want to post results to a financial offset? And then how do I want to update currency translation? For these particular balance sheets, I want to use the current type for my translation type. Now, from these particular accounts, I don't have to have these options marked. You can kind of pick and choose which ones that you want to roll down. All right, so once you have this box filled in, you'll go and click on the update button. You will get a message that says changing the currency translation type removes translated beginning balance information. You can update the information with a new transaction type using the currency translation window. Do you wish to change the currency type? For me, yes, I do. Now, while this is running, it only takes about a second or two. But I will say with multi-currency and any kind of trying to change multi-currency, we have seen some issues with GL accounts that have been merged together. And from those GL accounts that are merged together, and when the year-end close for general ledger is performed, in some cases there have been clients that have had problems with the multi-currency module after they have basically merged accounts together. So just a heads up on that. Okay. Never let the hourglass fool you. Sometimes you have to move around the mouse in order for it to show that it is no longer processing. All right. So now that we have this process, we'll know that we have over in our cards and our accounts. where our particular accounts have been updated. Oops. Clicked a little too fast there. All right. So that we can still go over to our account. We could go over to currency. And now we should see now that our euro is marked. And this particular operation we would also want to do, we go back to the window, Cards Financial, Update. And once again, I'm going to pick my second segment because that's my natural account. And now that I've done my balance sheet accounts, I'm going to go over to my P&L account. We can insert into the restrictions box, update my currencies. I'm going to select my euro. And I want to see average. I can also select the update revaluation option, and I'm choosing that change here. And I really did want that to post to an offset account. So from there, we're going to click Update. It'll ask me changing the currency translation type, remove translated beginning balances. You can update the information with new translation type using currency translation window. Do you want to change the currency translation type? Here for me, yes. And it only takes about a second to run. It should be done. Okay, so those guys are done. And once again, if I go to Cards Financial Account, and then I scroll down to any of my P&L accounts, choose a subscription, go to Currency, we'll see it's now marked as average. I'm going to reevaluate the account by net change. Any kind of realized gain or loss is going, or unrealized gain or loss, would go to the financial offset. It's at my euro. Currency ID selected, so I should be good to go there. Now, once you have your currency set up and your rate table and your GL accounts, associated or assigned to allow for that particular currency, so the next you need to, if you're using the purchasing module or if you're using the receivables management module, then you'll want to also update your vendors or your customers in order to use currency as well. And we'll go through that in just a second. So what I want to do is I'm actually going to go over here to cards, and I'm going to sales, and I'm going to go customer. And then within my customer ID, go and choose one of my customers, Aaron Fitz. All right, so from my customer card, I want to go over to options and click on options. And then you should notice down here there's a currency ID. Now Aaron Fitz is actually, right now, he is selected to only use US dollar. So what I want to do, and this is kind of this is a default to when, if you are doing a lot of transactions with a customer, and let's say they are a European customer and they are constantly, or the majority of the time, what they do is they send you invoices and transact in another currency, such as euro. So let's say, for example, Aaron Fitz usually transacts with us or sends us invoices in, or we send them invoices in euro. So we want to change that currency ID. There's also the rate type ID, and I'm going to choose average here. And so now whenever I create an invoice for, let's say, Aaron Fitz, the currency on the invoice is going to default to euro. And I'll click there. The same is true with the vendor. So if I go over to my vendor card, if I go to card, purchasing, and vendor, go to Allison Properties. If I go to options down at the bottom, and then up in the top to the left, I see there's a particular currency ID for Allison Properties. I can change this currency ID to euro and pick a rate type ID, such as average, click select, and then click OK. So now anytime I enter in a voucher, a payables voucher, the currency ID and the rate type ID from the customer card will default in for that particular voucher. So for example, if I go to transactions and I go to purchasing and I'm going to do a simple transaction entry, and then we'll go down and we'll choose Allison Properties, and then you'll see the currency ID that defaults is euro. Now, that particular message that I just got, and I'll get it again, I tab off of it, it just says that the default rate type is not assigned to an exchange table for the selected currency. Do you want to continue? Okay. Since I did not default in average as my default on the rate table, this is why I'm getting this message. So I can hit continue, but then I get the exchange rate entry window, and it's going to ask me for the rate type. So I'm going to manually have to put it in every time. Well, it's assigned to it. And there's one little thing that we didn't do. So let's go back into tools, we'll go to setup, and then we'll have to go back into system. And for the rate type itself, now on a particular rate type, remember when we went back and when we set up this, you will actually want to put in an average and then click insert and do selected rate types. Otherwise, you will be stuck with getting the messages that you just saw me get. This actually is a very common mistake, and it's usually the one step people forget to do. From this particular window, we can actually see our rates. As we know, here's my euro to US dollar, where I have my exchange rate. So save here. And then we'll go back to purchasing and transaction entry and Allison Properties. There you go. Now, for some reason, it's not picking up the exchange rate, but it should. Okay, anyway. Okay. So next, what we want to do is just enter in our document number. And you'll notice on the purchases themselves, they do have, the euro symbol on them. Pick any of the distributions. Now, I will say this, that in order for you to use the GL account for like this type of transaction, since it is in euro, you will need to make sure the GL account has the euro assigned to it, like what we did earlier. Otherwise, you're going to get a message that tells you you cannot use this account because this particular currency is not assigned to it. So just keep that in mind as well. So then for this particular transaction, we can just post it. Well, I'm going to add it to that. Okay. So, and that's it. And pretty much the same thing over in receivables management. Whenever you go to add in a particular, whenever you go into receivables management and you start doing transactions, you're going to get the same thing, because on the transactions and sales and transaction entry, whatever customer that you choose, so we did Aaron Fitz, you see here the currency ID is euro. So we need to make sure that's done. Now, there are a couple of things with the realized gain and losses. I know. Okay. That I want to say, because on those rate tables, so if I go back to GP tool setup and company, system, we'll go look at the exchange table again, the one that we set up for the euro here. And the rates, and then tool setup, financial, and the rate type. All right, US dollar. Now, there are also GL accounts that are associated with each one of the exchange rate types. So if I go to accounts, I can actually default in where I want the realized gain or loss, unrealized. Remember the financial offset that you will also see on the account itself, like cards, financial account. When we look at currency, there's your financial offset. That correlates with the window the multi-currency posting account setup window. There's your financial offset. Sales, purchasing, round-offs, and rounding differences, you can also have those as well. Because with multi-currency, multi-currency has a revaluation, okay? So you could revaluate and have unrealized or realized gains and losses. Now, on this particular window, and you can go to Microsoft Dynamics GP, and this is actually under Tools and Routines, Financial, and there's a Revaluation. And under the Revaluations option, when you first look at it, it's going to be blank. So you actually have to set up your revaluation criteria. Within the series, you can revaluate financial, that's your general ledger and general ledger accounts. You can actually revaluate your sales, or you can revaluate your purchasing. Okay. For the majority of clients, they only do the financial because their financial statements, that's what they care about the most. Now, you can, like I said, you can revaluate the sales or purchasing modules. However, most people don't, but you can do it. So it is very optional. And what it does is it goes through your transactions that are in your sales module or your purchasing module, and it revaluates them based off of a certain exchange rate that you put into this window. So I'm going to show you just how to do the general ledger. So I have to type in, you want to give your revaluation option a name, and you want to say results, print report only or post. I recommend that you just want to print the report only first so that you can actually eyeball to see and make sure it's correct and what you want. And then you select your currencies down here at the bottom. And typically what it is it's the currency that you're using within your system. Now you can select, well, if it's being used, you can select it. And if you have transactions that are in, let's say, Canadian dollar, that you translated over to US dollar, you can do a number of things. You can select a rate type. As in my case, average. You can actually do a use date from, and I can do a current date, in a period, in a month. I could enter a date, a particular date I want to use. Then I could add the date, let's say 4/30/2017. No, it doesn't have for that particular date, but I have an exchange rate that I can add here. Doesn't like my date at all. Go back to you. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I was trying to enter date. I need to enter rate. So for my particular Canadian translation, I'm choosing the enter rate because at the end of the day, I want to enter my own rate. So I'm going to put point, A3, 456, whatever. Do I want to add this exchange rate? Sure, because it's not in my table anyway. And then from there, what I can do is I can also restrict the particular list. So the restrictions button at the bottom and to the right, if I click on it, there's also a sort by, so I can sort by currency ID. I can actually select a range. So I can select my segment 2 and actually go in and select a particular range of natural GL accounts that I want to translate. And remember I said print the report only. So that's what I want to see first. I can calculate gains or losses, unrealized or realized. So, and then from there, I just click the Revaluate button, and I print the report to the screen. And this will tell me up front, what accounts are going to be revaluated based on the Canadian dollar. It will give me the exchange rate, the functional amount, the unrealized gain, or unrealized loss that I'm going to experience in each one of these accounts. Okay, so there's one more thing that we need to cover here, and that is actually multi-currency with management reporter and what that looks like. Now, multi-currency translation with management reporter is actually very simple. So remember our euro that we created, our EUR. What we're going to do really quick is look at the column structure for that particular. Let's see. I'm just going to really quickly pick an income statement here. So while that is opening, what we're going to see on the column is in the currency restriction field, our currency filter, actually currency display. So if we want to actually show or have a currency that is in, to have our report show a different currency, we want to go to currency display, and then we're going to click the drop down. Now, in each one of these, we have the reporting currencies that we can choose. I'm going to just choose my EUR, and if I wanted to, I can actually type it over here and put EUR. Now, basically, that's all I have to do, because Management Reporter is actually going to go back to my currency, my company currency setup window, and it's going to look for EUR, and then whatever I have as a rate table associated to like historical or current or average, it's going to translate that from that GL account based on like an average rate or current rate or whatever. It's going to use all that information in GP. So all I have to do is say, you know, I want this particular column translated to a euro currency amount. And basically how it works is from GP, from this window that is the company MultiCurrency Setup window. So from my rate table, like euro to USD, when since it's going from a euro currency to a US dollar currency, when it gets over to Management Reporter is going to take whatever rate I have in the current, not the current, but or whatever is associated to the GL account, and it's actually going to flip the rate. So if I have, you know, going from euro to US dollar is divided 0.83456. Well, in multi-currency, if I want it to go back to the euro, it's going to flip it going the other way. So it's going to multiply it times, you know, whatever the flip of the rate is. So it's going to actually give me what my euro is. It's not going to give me the US dollar. Now, since these are being converted from one currency into US dollar, then for Management Reporter, and this is what you're going to currently see, is you don't have a currency displayed at all. Now, what I will say is if you put euro in your currency display, you will also want to go up to your formatting, like formats and currency override, because what you're going to see when you print it out, they will have the dollar sign on them and not the euro. So you want to go up to your format override and choose the currency, and you have tons of options. So, and you can copy and paste these. So now when you go and you print out or run your report for Management Reporter, then you will come up and see, you know, your euro as your currency, or as presented as a euro. Now, get back over here. And here's another brief overview of the average calculation method. And that is actually all I have for today, since we're a few minutes over. However, we do have some additional webinars coming up. If you look for the 2017 GP webinar series on our website, is www.socius1.com. And we will be having Management Reporter creating balance sheets on June 6th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Management Reporter creating income statements July 6th, 1 to 2 Eastern Standard Time. And I believe Philip Nicholas is giving those webinars. And then we have the Dynamics GP and Power BI. Now this webinar you probably do not want to miss. It should be really exciting. It's going to be held on July 18th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that is all I have for today, and I thank you for joining us and going through Dynamics GP and multi-currency.